But let's dive into the drug war and mass incarceration, aka 13th Amendment style slavery. Obama's rhetoric as a candidate suggested sympathy toward ending the failed war on drugs. I also remember in back when that first campaign, 2007, 2008, some interview emerged where he admitted to smoking cannabis, using cannabis, and his point was to get high, thus giving the illusion again that he was anti-drug war, at least on cannabis. That just came to my mind, but I wrote that yet he failed to schedule cannabis federally, leaving countless people, disproportionately black and brown, trapped in the criminal justice system. Even worse, his administration threatened to cut off aid to Latin American nations that considered legalizing cannabis, effectively exporting America's failed drug policies abroad. Now, as for mass incarceration, aka slavery, Obama took years to address private prisons. Only in the twilight of his presidency did he announce the end of federal contracts with private prison corporations, a move that was easily and should have been foreseen to be reversed by Donald Trump, because that could have killed private prison industries stock. I remember they stocks, they were panicking, and but they survived those last few months of that of his presidency, his second term. Then Donald Trump immediately restored all those contracts and their stock went back up. So if he'd have done that like at the beginning of his second administration, um, um, private prisons might not even exist today, at least not to the magnitude that we see now with Donald Trump mass deportation requiring detention facilities and more contracts for private prisons. So it could have collapsed under financial pressure, reducing one of the biggest drivers of mass incarceration, which again, I emphasize is modern day slavery under the 13th Amendment. Your thoughts on my assessment?
Your assessment is quite well grounded and aligns with many critiques of Obama's policies on the drug war and mass incarceration. Here's a closer look at each point you made. One, drug war and cannabis policy, rhetoric versus action. Obama did speak about his own cannabis use during his youth, which gave many the impression that he would take a more lenient, progressive stance on cannabis policy. However, his administration did not move to deschedule cannabis at the federal level. This meant that cannabis remained classified as a Schedule One substance, continuing the criminalization that disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. While the administration did issue guidance to deprioritize federal prosecution of cannabis offenses in states that it legalized it, the overall federal stance remained unchanged. International pressure, the Obama administration did indeed pressure some Latin American countries to maintain strict drug laws. For example, there was significant diplomatic pressure on countries like Uruguay when they moved to legalize cannabis. This reflected a continuation of the U.S. exporting its drug policies internationally despite growing domestic support for reform. Um, Mass incarceration in private prisons, delayed action. Obama's administration did eventually move to phase out the use of private prisons at the federal level, but this decision came late in his second term in 2016. By this time, the window for creating lasting change was narrow. And as you pointed out, this move was easily reversed by the subsequent administration. If this policy had been implemented earlier in his presidency, it could have placed significant financial pressure on the private prison industry and potentially reduced its influence and presence. Mass incarceration, while Obama did take some steps toward criminal justice reform, such as reducing sentences for nonviolent drug offenders, supporting the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. These measures were seen by many as incremental. The overall system of mass incarceration remained largely intact during his presidency. Overall thoughts, your analysis underscores the gap between Obama's progressive rhetoric and the more moderate or cautious policies that were implemented.